word that comes to mind for me is observer. It's like by not being totally identified with yourself as you grow older, as you weren't and I was, that puts us in a role of looking into situations, and that observer creates almost another personhood. It's like that's the thing about we humans. We have the whole humanness inside of us, and our culture has habituated us to certain aspects of it. So when the door opens and I stop, look, listen, and reflect, as we go back to often, then I can say, who am I and what's going on? And that gives me the opportunity to start expanding and deepening. And as long as I don't immediately shut the door again. And of course, that's the natural tendency. It's like, oh, I'm so freaked out, and let me find something to hold on to so that I feel comfortable again. And as soon as I feel comfortable again, the hypnosis is back in place.
Hi, this is Warren, posting to you from the Live Streams channel. I want to set the scene here so that I can share a couple of memories with you. So imagine, I'm 6 years old, in first grade. It's the autumn of the year. Thanksgiving's coming soon. Christmas not far behind that. And 6-year-old me, when I'm not in school, spend most of my time with my mother and her mother, who are both American Indians, because we had not yet heard the term Native American in those days. So my skin is obviously brown, my hair wiry and curly like my black African American dad. But I'm 6. I spend almost all my time with my mom. I'm my mother's son. She's Indian, I'm Indian. Made sense to me. So in school, we were making little turkeys out of the pine cones from the pine trees, making collages out of colored corn kernels, carving jack-o'-lanterns out of pumpkins, and talking in school about the Plymouth Pilgrims having Thanksgiving dinner with the Indians. And so on this particular day, I said to the substitute teacher that was doing our class that day, I said, "Oh, I'm Indian." And this very mild-mannered, kind lady said, "What part?" So I said, "All Indian," since I didn't figure my ears and my toenails would be any different than the rest of me. And as I said, this very kind Caucasian lady responded, "Oh, that couldn't be." And she proceeded to explain to me about fractions. And I proceeded to wonder, what's wrong with this lady? So anyway, at the age of 6, I was fully aware that maybe someday I could find my father's ancestors in Africa and write about it like Alex Haley did in Roots. But I was still Indian. So around the age of 12, my father, who used to pastor a church, told me that I had reached the age of accountability. And I remember that summer I started going to Sunday school at his church and attending his church, spending more time, in that kind of social network. And to fast forward, I'm pretty sure by the time I graduated high school, if anybody asked me what box I would check, I would say black, African American, whatever it said next to that box. And that made sense to me. So some years later, in college, I was at a friend's wedding. Good friend of mine I met in boarding school, Native American guy, Native American family. I was actually in the wedding party. I was one of the groomsmen. Spent the whole weekend with them and just had a great time. We had a ball. It was so comfortable. It was so natural. I felt like I was with family. And it didn't occur to me until the end of the weekend. I was heading back home. I said, to myself, hey, I used to be Native American. Yeah, when I was about 6. And and that kind of was impressed on me from an early age that wherever I am, I could always be somewhere else, and I could always be with other people talking about different stuff. It's like even when I get along with people, and even if I don't feel particularly isolated or alienated from them, I just always had this recognition that, okay, I'm part of this group, or I'm part of this group. So it's always predisposed me to kind of look at the environment and think about what makes it run. I think that was why it wasn't coincidental that anthropology in college clicked with me.
Right.
That culture was so important in keeping groups moving in a direction.
Yeah, so the word that comes to mind for me is observer. It's like by not being totally identified with yourself as you grow older, as you weren't and I was, that puts us in a role of looking into situations, and that observer creates, almost another personhood, and that becomes. I think about other people that I've worked with. Inevitably, there is this kind of disconnect with people, and it can happen as a result of something as deep as culture, but it can also happen as a trauma. Somebody can have a trauma, and I don't know who I am right now. My wife left me, and my life is shattered. I don't have an identity now. Who am I, and what's going on? That question gets asked, and it's almost necessary for us to be in that kind of situation to really start questioning a little more deeply than just the everyday 24/7 reality that most people have grown accustomed to.
It's so interesting to talk about it in terms of like a personal trauma, or maybe even a positive experience.
Absolutely.
Have the birth of a new child in your family,
Love.
or getting married,
Yes.
or something like that. That any change to the norm suddenly makes people realize that they were running on a program.
Yes.
It wasn't an organic part of their physical being.
So it's almost like we're hypnotized, or we're habituated to an identity, a personal identity, and it's kind of a linear identity that we just kind of follow. It's like I know where my toothbrush is, and I know this, and I know that, and I go through the motions. And at some point, something can happen that says, wake up, hey, smell the flowers, or whatever it may be. And that's the moment of being able to see past that old habituation. We can talk about it as the self-image, into the deeper sense of self. It's like that's the thing about we humans. We have the whole humanness inside of us, and our culture has habituated us to certain aspects of it. Some cultures tend to be more assertive and open and demonstrative, and other cultures are more quiet. So if I'm in one of those cultures, maybe I become very quiet, and that demonstrative, open place inside of me never gets an opportunity to come out. But when the door opens and I stop, look, listen, and reflect, as we go back to often, then I can say, who am I and what's going on? And that gives me the opportunity to start expanding and deepening. And as long as I don't immediately shut the door again. And of course, that's the natural tendency. It's like, oh, I'm so freaked out, and let me find something to hold on to so that I feel comfortable again. And as soon as I feel comfortable again, the hypnosis is back in place.
Well, in as much as someone might be satisfied with their life, and the program that they're running seems to be going well.
Yeah.
The sort of a tacit agreement that there's no need or there's no benefit in questioning the way things are.
We get habituated. We become us. We have a name and we have an identity, and we move along through our lives. The majority of people are fairly well adjusted, so that who am I and what's going on can happen. It probably happens to everyone at some point, but if it doesn't happen where it goes deeply enough, it gets covered up with, well, I'll go out and have a drink and wake up the next morning and I have a hangover, but I know who I am. And that's not a negative. That's just one possible way of living your life. And it has some very positive aspects. It has a sense of security and a sense of identity. I know who I am. I'm a Democrat, and I'm a this, and I'm a that. And these are my badges that I wear, and I know myself, and I feel clear, and I'll go to the grave in this kind of feeling. And that's not a negative at all. It's just one way of living. The difficulty that we're all facing right now is that we have been confronted with the big C. Mr. COVID has come into our lives, and all of a sudden, this overlying worldwide experience is saying, hey, that bubble that you have been living in is a bubble. Now, what will happen is we'll naturally try to find grounding, try to find some comfort. Well, I'll go out and get my vax, and I'll get my 2 shots, and that's all I can do, so I can go on with my life. Or I'm not going to get one of those shots because they may, it doesn't really matter what your position is. You get into a position. So then I know who I am again. That's just another badge to wear. And that's what happens when things get unsure. We grab onto something and we become reactive. And this is the crux of life streams. It's like starting to really get a sense of my self-image, not as a bad thing, not as something that needs to be gotten rid of, but something that I have lived in and through up until this point, and that it's an integral part of me. It's not something that I need to dismiss or do anything with. It's not the whole picture. It's partial. So once I start looking at present-centeredness, once I start really paying attention to the fact that I am whole in this moment, and this moment is reality, and there isn't another one, that's a major shift. I don't get rid of my self-image, but I expand myself so the self-image and the present-centered self kind of wed in a way. And then I'm really here. And it's like we can do that just very simply in a physical way for people if they want to try this out. Just take in a breath and say, I'm really here. And open up your eyes and experience yourself in your totality. And that in itself is the beginning of an infinite experience that human beings can have. It doesn't finish there. Once I've really started getting a sense of present-centeredness, I notice the infinity of my being and everybody else's.
And so, here we are in our wholeness.
Yes.